Thanks for dropping by Empire's podcast, The Ottomans. I'd like to ask you to leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. It helps others discover the show. Also, it looks like by the time this episode drops, 70 people will be following the show on Spotify. So, a big thank you for that. If you'd like to reach out, please shoot me an email at empiresofhistorypodcast@gmail.com. One more thing. If you're listening to the show on Spotify, you'll find a question at the end of the show's description. The question is, how deep would you like the Vlad Dracula extra episode to be? What I mean by this is I plan on releasing a Halloween special on the famous vampire himself, an intractable enemy of the Ottomans, Vlad Dracula. So, if you're listening on Spotify, I'd appreciate it if you left your answer in the fields provided. And just so you know, this Dracula episode will be dropping at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Halloween Day. I plan on releasing a Halloween special each year as a kind of tradition moving forward. And now, let's jump in. A crusade dies at the Second Battle of Kosovo, the death of Murad II, and ascension, finally, of Mehmed II. Episode 23. In Episode 22, we left off with John Hunyadi at the fields of Kosovo, the same ill-fated ancient battlefield where Murad I had defeated Prince Lazar in 1389. The date was October the 17th, 1448, and this coming battle was a last-ditch attempt by the Crusaders to unify Europe and fight the Ottomans in the Balkans. Opposite Hunyadi on the battlefield was both Sultan Murad II and his son and future badass, Mehmed II. Mehmed and Murad had reconciled their differences in the later part of Episode 22, and Mehmed, for the first time at the age of 16, led troops from Anatolia. Yep, Dad is definitely letting you hold the flashlight, Mehmed. Better not mess this one up. Murad commanded the center of the Ottoman force, with his left flank under the leadership of one of his best generals, while Mehmed led the right flank. The Ottoman army that showed up that misty morning on the plains of the Blackbirds was altogether a different army than what Hunyadi had previously fought. During the Crusade of Varna, Murad had observed some friction between the older traditional units from Anatolia and the upgraded units from Rumelia. It wasn't that these forces couldn't get along, just that the Muslim troops tended to use old-fashioned tactics that were devastating against an unprepared opponent, but against the advanced armies of Europe, especially under the capable command of Hunyadi, well, this led to disaster. After Varna, Murad went about reorganizing the military of the empire. He established a dedicated technical corps composed of bridge builders, foragers, and cannon specialists. Now, already there existed such a corps, but Murad had established schools and Edrine to start formally training these cadets. After the Janissary revolt against his son in 1446, Murad kicked many of the old soldiers off the rolls. Then he set about supplementing their numbers with newer Christian-born stock from the colleges and offered accelerated promotions. Murad also established a dedicated unit to study, emulate, and improve upon the battle wagons that Hunyadi had so effectively used against the Ottomans, first in Wallachia in 1442 and then at Varna in 1444. In fact, Murad had put his general staff to work studying the tactics of Hunyadi and working their damnedest to make improvements to defeat him. The result of these reforms was that the Ottoman army facing Hunyadi was leaner, meaner, and better trained and equipped than any force Hunyadi had yet faced. On John Hunyadi's side, against the backdrop of the dreaded Turkish drums, he drew up his army. He placed his battle wagons in the front of his center, thus covering his newly acquired Italian cannons. While researching this episode, I realized that a blow-by-blow account of the battle would be almost impossible. If you guys catch any YouTube videos displaying this battle with flashy graphics, I just want you to know that they're probably making up about 80% of it. The truth is that the details have been lost to history, but by all accounts, it seems like Hunyadi abandoned his former tactical savvy and instead threw everything he had at the Ottomans, praying for a quick knockout. So we aren't really left with the finer details of this or that unit being led by this sub-commander or another, unlike what we have at Nicopolis or Varna. Instead, historians paint a bloody free-for-all on the plains of the Blackbirds, with both Hunyadi and Murad abandoning tactical caution. Battle was joined in the afternoon of October 17th, when Hunyadi, seeing the massive numbers the enemy had assembled in the field opposite him, ordered his right and left flanks to advance upon the Ottoman positions. All day long his Christian cavalry charged and inflicted heavy losses on the Ottomans. However, towards the end of that day, the Turkish Sipahi cavalry forced the Christians to withdraw back to their lines. Pretty soon night fell, and both sides regrouped and reassessed. Both sides seemed to be under the impression that the other was near the breaking point, and all that was needed was one final all-out push. The next day, Hunyadi ordered a direct charge against the Ottoman center. Over the course of the previous night, Murad had ordered large wooden stockades to be built around his center, and when the knights and infantry of Hunyadi's forces attacked, the Turks managed to hold them off. With heavy losses on both sides, night fell again. This time, in the dead of night, Hunyadi moved his cannons close to the Ottoman center, and after they blasted a devastating barrage against the enemy behind the stockades, the Crusaders attacked. Like at Varna, the Janissaries held firm and forced the Christians back with heavy losses on both sides. Not much changed tactically except both sides lost a ton of men, and the suffering was immense. On the morning of October the 19th, Murad's scouts reported that Hunyadi's left flank was weakened. He ordered every single Sipahi horseman he had into an attack on Hunyadi's flank. As cover for this operation, he ordered his Janissaries and Azov infantry to advance against the Christians all up and down the line. Distracted by what he suspected was a desperate last-minute Ottoman attack, Hunyadi told his leaders that all they had to do was survive this one final push, then they could drive Murad from the battlefield in one glorious counterattack. However, after 30 minutes of heavy fighting, Hunyadi realized the Sipahi had ridden behind his left flank, and now his men were completely surrounded. Hunyadi tried desperately to send in reinforcements, but the Ottomans had the rest of his army pinned down. He watched as 5,000 of some of his best cavalry and infantry were cut to pieces in front of everyone, the Ottomans having raised the black standard, meaning that no prisoners were to be taken and the wounded cut down. The only thing saving the Crusaders was night fell early, and Murad was unable to coordinate a full-scale push that could have broken the Crusaders. That night in the battle wagons, a bitter argument was breaking out between the Hungarians and Wallachians. The leader of the Wallachians argued for the army to abandon their positions and head north. Hunyadi, though, refused to budge. He seemed to be of the mind that the entire effort against the Ottomans was reaching a critical point, and one that extended way beyond the fields of the Blackbirds. On the one hand, a retreat made good tactical sense. Just head back up north and live to fight another day and all that. But heading north would mean passing through Serbian land to get up to Hungary. And the Serbians were not happy at all about the raping and pillaging the Crusaders had inflicted upon their populace. The despot of Serbia had amassed an impressive force of militia and mercenaries, centered in Belgrade, and he was currently fighting the Albanians to prevent a link-up with Hunyadi. Although Hunyadi's Crusaders were more than a match for the Serbian force, Hunyadi could never be sure the extent to which his fellow Crusaders could stomach a war with Serbia after the beating inflicted upon them by Murad. The other issue vexing the great commander was the realization that if they didn't inflict at least a tactical draw upon their Ottoman enemy, then it was unlikely that another crusade could be put together for the foreseeable future. Volunteers for the current venture had been slow to come by, and Europe was increasingly coming to view the Ottomans through the lens of a kind of military fatalism. The Balkans, at the end of the day it was whispered, were doomed to fall under the yoke of the Ottoman Empire, one way or another. Far better for Poland, Hungary, Italy, and the Germanic states to plan for when the Ottomans would strike into Central Europe, as the Ottomans eventually did so in real life. If Hunyadi was going to stop the Ottomans and recover the Balkans, a victory had to happen in Kosovo, something to prove to the rest of Europe that Ottoman conquest wasn't inevitable. Unbeknownst to Hunyadi, secret dispatches were frantically passing between the Wallachians' perimeter of the camp and the Ottomans. Observing the campfires of their enemies dwindling one by one, Mehmed and Murad captured several Christian knights who were attempting to desert. From these captives, Murad learned of the divide which existed between Hunyadi and the Wallachians. Moving to exploit this, he sent men up into the Christian lines, and pretty soon a gravy offered was delivered by the Sultan. The offer Murad made to the Wallachians was this: to break camp that night and get the hell out of Dodge, and in return, the Sultan would let them all live and not be enslaved. But you had to act now. Word of this spread quick amongst the Wallachians, all 8,000 of them, and their leaders were forced to accept. Hunyadi could do nothing to stop this deep betrayal by his erstwhile allies. He watched as 8,000 men broke camp, simply got up and left. With only a small force now of 12,000 men left to him, Hunyadi lost control of the situation by daybreak. The Ottomans attacked as soon as the sun broke above the horizon, and the Crusaders desperately attempted to fight them off in their wagons. However, the cannons of Murad broke the wagons apart, and the Christian center was fully surrounded. Hunyadi himself barely escaped the carnage, as the Ottomans, with their black standards waving, took no prisoners. While trying to make his way back to Hungary, Hunyadi had to avoid Wallachians, now allied with the Ottomans, but his luck ran out when he was captured in Serbia and imprisoned. After raising a ransom of 100,000 gold florins, the Hungarians had him released. We haven't heard the last of John Hunyadi, but this in a lot of ways would be the last hooray of one of Europe's best and most professional soldiers against the Ottoman war machine. Murad looked at his still young son Mehmed, who was enjoying the dancing and partying accompanying this great victory. In so many ways the day and future belonged to Mehmed. Murad, by showing grace to his son and carefully working around his ego, allowed his son to fully share in this great victory over the Christians. This meant that Mehmed now had a solid foundation to begin building credit as a military commander. When Mehmed bestrode the halls of the governmental palaces in Edirne, he could now meet the cold stare of the Janissaries, whom had looked down on him before. Kendarli now would be dealing with a military vet this next go-around, not some soft, spoiled prince. Mehmed was getting some salt, in other words. Thinking of his son and his future sultanate, Murad wanted to ensure that the victory at Kosovo would form the building blocks of a solid empire for Mehmed. As such, in 1449, Murad cooked up a bullshit reason for invading and subjugating all of Wallachia and bringing them under Ottoman rule. He invaded the country, and this time allowed his troops off the hook to ransack every town and village they came across, and generally spread terror all around. He deposed the ruler and placed a vassal on the throne, and I might add took some of the little Dracula kiddos with him as hostages back to Edirne. Next, in 1450, he turned west and marched on Albania with another large army, this time successfully conquering a majority of the country. However, the core of resistance, centered amongst a large castle in the middle of the mountains, would remain free for some time. As soon as Murad marched out of Albania, its ruler emerged from this castle and caused all kinds of trouble for the Ottomans. I should mention also that after the defeat of the Crusaders, Murad and Mehmed marched into Anatolia and fought with the remnants of Timur's empire as well as the Achaemenids, and actually managed to push the Achaemenids back, and generally help round out the territories and enforce order in the provinces. I wanted to talk more about this campaign in Anatolia, but if I did, then we'd probably be in another 8 episodes out from Constantinople, and that's not something I'm trying to do. On February the 3rd, 1451, Sultan Murad II succumbed to an illness he picked up in January. The sources say he died in Edirne after a really harsh winter. Murad II is probably one of the very best all-around sultans the empire ever produced. In a lot of ways, I see him as a better version of what the late Sultan Bayezid the Lightning Bolt could have been. He had Bayezid's best qualities: a natural leader of men, sharp instinct for tactical maneuvers, a flair for moving his army quickly over vast distances, and always ready to step up into whatever military role the empire required of him. Yet, he was never saddled with any of the shortcomings of Bayezid's character. He was slow to anger, always diplomatic in his correspondences, and was a guy who really got other people. Even the Pope, Hunyadi, and various other European kings, counts, dukes, and emperors sent representatives when his body was laid to rest in Bursa. It is said that the Byzantine emperor cried actual tears when word reached him of Murad's death. Although, we will see soon that it may have been less the death of an Ottoman sultan which moved Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, as it was the knowledge that this polite and philosophical sultan would be replaced by none other than Mehmed II. At a ceremony in Edirne, Mehmed was girded with the sword of Osman for the second time, and became sultan for the final time in 1451. Wow. Are we actually at the ascension of Mehmed II? Pretty much. Next time, I plan on doing an episode on Mehmed securing his throne, an overview of the strategic and political situation of the Eastern Mediterranean at this time, and then we're going to start laying the groundwork for the fall or conquest, whichever side you're on, of Constantinople. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me so far. I look forward to telling the stories of the Ottomans. Until next time.